That's like the worst sound on the planet.
Oh gosh, that's new. So welcome again, everybody. Recorded this time, so if you do not want your face or voice in the video, feel free to turn off your camera or your microphone. Very excited to have everybody here, especially new people. That's very cool, especially during the summer. We were not expecting this. So glad you were able to make it. For your information, this will also be posted on YouTube, and I will be posting the slides in the Discord as well. So if you want to come back to it, or if you have to leave at any point in time, that is perfectly fine. Okay, so welcome. This is the first workshop of our mini classic novel design challenge that we're going to be starting. So very cool. This is concept week, so we're going to be working on developing the initial ideas and kind of making it a bit more tangible for actually being able to use in design. Oh, yes, so welcome. Restating exactly what I just said. Okay, so first off, if you have read the prompt, if you had the opportunity to do so, basically we are going to be designing an area, a themed area, a ride, something, whatever your mind comes up with, that is based on a story in the public domain. So if you're unaware, the public domain is essentially intellectual property that is so old that it is no longer under the copyright holder. There is no copyright holder. It is available for everybody to use. An example of that would be Shakespeare, Dracula, the Iliad and Odyssey, stuff, again, anything that's basically older than Gatsby. I think Gatsby is just entered the public domain, so 1920s and before around. So why would you use public domain for a project like this? There's no royalties that you would have to pay if theoretically you wanted to develop this project. You also don't have to worry about someone like Disney or Universal getting mad that you're already using their IP. There's a very rich base to pull from. There are a ton of stories in the public domain. This can be historical events, this can be actual novels, this can even be mythologies from different cultures. So if you have a particular culture or mythology that you're drawn to, feel free to go off of that. If you're really into Vikings, that's in the public domain. Another cool thing is it's familiar. So a lot of reasons that people like going to theme parks is to see and experience stories that they already know and love. So this is a way to bring more of those stories into your designs. It's a way to kind of jump off from something that people already know and maybe subvert it. And if you're unsure if something that you're really interested in is in the public domain, you can just Google it. It'll be there. So this is a quote that I really liked about this. Sue Monk Kidd, the author of The Secret Life of Bees, if you haven't read that, she said, stories have to be told or they die. And when they die, we can't remember who we are or why we're here. So I think it's very important to bring a lot of kind of this cultural base that we had and put it into something tangible, like a theme park, like a museum, anything like that. Okay, so moving on to the actual steps of the creative process, starting with picking an idea. I'd say the hardest part of the process is coming up with brainstorming and then narrowing it down. So the first step when you're choosing an idea is to do research. So once you get the prompt, the same if you're getting a script for a movie and you're designing the set, you want to read it over a couple times to fully understand what either the client or the design challenge is asking for in this case. Then it's good to get started on research for potential topics. The internet is your friend. One source that I really like to use is I'll put something into Pinterest once I've kind of maybe gotten the general topic I want, and Pinterest is really good for pulling up a lot of related ideas. So a second step that I find to be really helpful personally is to create a mind map. So you guys might have done this before, maybe in elementary school when you've had to do a book report or something like that, or something for a psychology class. Basically, mind maps are a web way of brainstorming where you actually write down the connections of what you're thinking. This is an example I found on Google. They're really helpful because you can start with a big topic and start branching off into smaller things. So if your big topic is Greek mythology, you can branch off into different stories, you can branch off into aspects of different stories, and that really can help narrow down and isolate different ideas. Okay, so you've done your mind map, you've done your research, you feel like you have a couple of ideas going on. How do you select the idea? So I think there's a couple things that you have to ask yourself. Number one, does it fit the prompt? Your client might want something very specific. If you are the only person designing and you're only designing for yourself, then that's completely fine. You do whatever you want. But if you're designing for a design competition, for example, there's going to be certain limitations. Has it been done before? one thing that's in the public domain is 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, but there's already been a ride for that. So you might, want to veer away from that. But then again, if it has been done before, you still technically can do it. There's, a million different movie versions of Cinderella or The Little Mermaid, for example. But you might want to figure out, how can you make it unique? What can you add to the story that will make people want to actually experience your attraction? Number 4, if there is enough, or is there enough source material, or will you have to add to the original canon? The more far back you get, there tends to be, things lost or a lot of different versions of stories. So you might have a lot of creative liberty, which you may like, or you might want to just go exactly with the story and choose something that is a bit more concrete and the same and more familiar. And then finally, which I think is very important, does it actually lend itself to being made into a themed environment? There's a lot of really cool stories, but they might be a little less possible, or they might be boring, or they might just not really fit somewhere that's location based. So there might be a really cool way to do it that you can think of that hasn't been done before. But if that's not something that you're able to do or even willing to do, then you might have to scrap that idea. Okay, so let's say you have selected your novel that you're going to be using. What do you do next? I like to do mood boards. I think they're a really good way to do inspiration pictures and things like that. If you've ever been to a TPEG workshop before, we tend to do these quite often. Okay, so initial steps for mood boards. In your research phase, you might have come across some inspiration photos that really stick out to you. The good thing is you can use those to start your mood board. What I like to do is go on Pinterest and say I'm doing Bram Stoker's Dracula. I'll just Google search the word Gothic, and I will pin a bunch of stuff that inspires me. You can look up vampire, you can look up even really weird things that there are adjectives that you wouldn't think would be on there, and they'll usually have something because people use Pinterest all the time for mood boards, for weddings, for things like that. So it's actually kind of a built-in mood board builder. However, the thing about Pinterest is that's not actually the mood board itself. From there, there's certain other steps that you have to take to kind of solidify, but it's a really good starting tool, especially to kind of link your research to more solidifying your idea. So for actually making the mood board, I know a lot of people hate this word, myself included, but you have to choose elements that reflect the vibe of your story. If that's something that you're subverting, it might be cool to make that choice from the start. If you're turning Dracula into something a lot more light and fluffy than the original story, then you might want to have that reflect in the mood of your mood board, if you will. A lot of things to think about. There's texture, lighting, costumes, time period. So you want kind of each of your elements on your mood board to reflect something different about what you're trying to show about your ride. You might not have to necessarily say, oh, I want my ride to have, this drop here and this drop here. That's not actually the mood. It's kind of what your guest is experiencing internally and what the theming reflects in terms of the story. So try to think less concrete and a little bit more abstract, and you tend to get a lot of really good stuff. And then also make sure your background and your text elements kind of link in together too. If you're going to be showing this as part of a pitch presentation, that's really important because presentation is everything. And it also will help you if you're going to be later using it for your pitch to maybe convince somebody to go for your idea. So as I've stated earlier, TPET has done mood board challenges before. These are from our concept design team, which is now the Blue Sky design team. If you were in it, you might recognize these. So these are all different examples of mood boards that were just made in about 20 minutes using Google Slides. So as you can see here, they all have different backgrounds and text elements that kind of match the theme. You have a dark circus, you have a sci-fi cryptid zoo, and then you have a more cottagecore wonderland kind of aesthetic one. They all have elements that they don't show you what the ride is. They don't necessarily show you what you're going to be doing, but they show you how you're going to be experiencing it, what elements you're going to see that kind of set the tone for the attraction. And that's what's really important. And you can do everything from just having a collage of images to kind of making it appear to be more 3D, kind of like this one down here. So it's very important for, I think, when you're trying to, before you start concept art, it helps you put together your color palette. It helps put together what you're going to want for your lighting and costumes, and if you have costumes, and I think that's very important. Okay, so this is kind of the final or second to last element of when you're doing concept generation. I'm sure you've all heard of concept art. It's a very, I'd say the most visible element of when you're doing concept. You see it all the time for things like Pixar films. So let's get into how to do it, because I think it can be quite intimidating. Oh, here we go. Okay, so when talking about the importance of concept art, I think it can intimidate a lot of people who might not consider themselves to be artistic. But the thing about concept art is it's a rough draft. Even if you aren't a stellar artist, what it really does is helps you solidify what you want to see in your attraction. So concept art can even be photo bashing, which is basically editing images from online sources, putting them together to kind of create your environment. You can sketch on paper, you can use digital art. There's a lot of different ways that you can show basically that you're coming up with these ideas yourself. And it also helps you, again, if you are, say, pitching this to a board of judges for a competition, it shows your thought process and shows how they've developed. If you look at the original concept art for Frozen, Anna and Elsa look completely different. The movie was called Ice Queen. That thing was in production forever, but it shows how they got from point A to point B, and it can help. I also, if you're doing this for a portfolio piece, you have a lot of stuff to put in there. There are many different ways to do concept art. Again, if you can do that digitally, you can do it from photographs. With Photoshop, you can do it traditionally, as in with watercolors or pen. So it's kind of up to you. And again, the most important thing about concept art, it does not have to be perfect. So if you're intimidated by it, you can kind of just look to what others have done, either online or ask your friends. And I think it's a good way to kind of start. Basically, what they say with engineers is you want to be able to do a sketch on a napkin to show what you're thinking as an idea. And I think that's very similar here. You want to basically just be able to show, this is kind of what my idea is. It's not perfect, but I want you to know that I have this in my head and I'm showing it to you. So here are some examples from the Swamp Ghost Design Competition. This one is of the outside of a building. This one is of the top of the building. And this is some costume design. There's a lot of different things that you can show. So you can, these are all very sketchy, not perfect final renderings. They look pretty good because I think they're kind of like a mid-level one. They're not like just pure sketches, but again, these don't have to be perfect. This is not a feasible building at all. But it's kind of a jumping point for if you were to do later final renderings, and it shows what you were thinking in your design process while you were doing it before you actually get into your 3D models or something like that. So the last part that I consider to still be part of concept generation is storyboarding. So this is kind of putting your designs into action. So storyboards basically essentially map out guest experience. They're almost like a comic of your design. If you guys are into comics or graphic novels, they're different panels that show scene by scene what you will be experiencing as somebody who comes to your attraction. They are also a timeline, which is important because you always have a point A or point B. Regardless, in Epcot, if you're somebody that enters from Mexico or Canada, you will be experiencing a timeline as you go along. They are important to make sure that your story is solid and exciting. So if you are, for example, doing some sort of omni-mover, you want people to be experiencing a story. And to get your story out, storyboards are very important so that you know yourself, that you have everything in there that the guest needs to know to get the entire story. I think this step is crucial because this kind of shows how you guys will be enjoying your attraction. It solidifies a lot of the stuff that you might have just in individual frames that aren't put together. So I personally find this to be very important. If you have something like a restaurant, this might not be as vital. But for a ride, I think this is definitely crucial. So this is an example from one of the Cornell theme park design competitions. It's a little blurry, so I hope you can see it, the basic idea, but it's very rough sketches. The people are blobs, but you can kind of see a flow of movement from one panel to the next of how the guests will be experiencing it, and that's all you need to do. There's a lot of examples of these from animation and film, so if you guys need more inspiration for that, if you decide to do this, those are excellent. All right, so first, before we get into our activity, does anybody have any questions? Okay, excellent. Chris, you are more than welcome to stop the